welcome to China EVs and More, where my co-host, Lei Xing, and I will go over the week's most important and interesting news coming out of the China EV, AV, and mobility sectors. We will open the room up at around the 40-minute mark to anyone who's keen to ask us any questions. What Lei and I discussed today is based on our opinions and should not be taken as investment advice. If you enjoyed this room, please help us get the word out to other enthusiasts. And of course, tune in again next week. My name is Tu Li. I am the managing director at Sino-Auto Insights, a Beijing-based consultancy that helps organizations bring innovative and tech-focused products and services to the transportation and mobility sectors. I write a free weekly newsletter that we pull many of our discussion topics from. You can sign up for it at sinoautoinsights.com, which of course I encourage you all to do. Lei, can you please introduce yourself?
Good morning. I am your co-host Lei Xing, former chief editor of China Auto Review, and good evening from my side. This is episode number 63. It's been a busy week, to say the least. Let me go through my headlines. You can stop wherever. You know, the biggest news is obviously Elon's $44 billion takeover of Twitter. It seems to be hanging in the air a little bit, but this episode, at least, is now linked with the richest man on earth and Tesla, a company we mentioned pretty much every single episode. So
should we only say good things now about Tesla?
No, I mean, we should say anything we want, right? Free speech? No?
I'll take my chance. Yes. Public square. This is the public square,
yeah.
Right?
So Neil's big milestone, 200K cumulative production. Welcome to the 200K club, as we say. Despite the myriad of challenges, they've done it. And going forward, if things continue to improve and doesn't get as bad, and if there hadn't been this outbreak, I mean, 300,000 by the end of the year was a foregone conclusion, right? I mean, that's their trajectory, but that remains to be seen.
Here are some quick statistics. 3 years to 100,000 with the ES8 and ES6, 1 year to 200,000. So it took 3 years to get to 100,000, 1 year to get to 200,000. I think, barring the pandemic and the supply chain issues, they could have gotten to 500,000 with the ET5, ET7, ES7, within a couple of years, I think.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens. And then just tons of AV news. Pony.ai 3 times, right? The taxi license, the investment into OnTime, and just yesterday, the driverless robo-taxis, plus Baidu, plus WeRide's robo-sweepers, Volkswagen Group's Cariad China launches, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. F-150 Lightning Job 1. So this comes a month after, the Lyric, right? But I think that obviously the F-150 is much more, whether you look at it as symbolic or a key product. Jim Farley taking a swipe, you can even charge other EVs for your friends that own Teslas. Yeah.
I think this is good.
Yeah.
I think a little bit of competition, a little bit of friendly.
It's busy, doing coke.
Yeah.
I can't believe I said that.
I thought that was a meme, and then I looked at the actual address or the Twitter handle, and I was like, he really tweeted that.
Oh, boy. And then a couple of interesting products launched or started pre-sale were from the two of the Japanese brands, the Honda ENS1 and the EMP1, and Toyota's BZ4X. Okay, and then more news from Horizon Robotics announcing their second partner for the Journey 5 chip. And I guess that's it. And we've seen some preliminary reports of April registration numbers that's pointing to an interesting picture You want to go there a little bit first?
For me, I've only seen the ICE numbers, and they're double-digit drops, significant double digits across the board for the foreign automakers. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah.
But yeah. Let's start with that.
Yeah. So I mean CPCA, they've done the weekly updates, and it's gotten worse, I think, by the week. So the latest numbers they had was from April 18th to 23. And this is including everything. So PVs, including NEVs. I mean, it's across the board. It's, the 30%, 40%.
We're not going to be able to point to just one thing. It's this folly of challenges and errors and tragedies that are causing not only the auto sector, but the greater economy of China. So we're talking China is going to lose a point or two of growth potentially if this doesn't get sorted out.
So we look at this in different buckets. We put BYD in its own bucket, and it's still based on the numbers that we've seen, right? It's probably still could do close, if not over 100,000 units,
right?
Despite, I guess, being where they are and being what it is, they've been shielded, sort of, from all the challenges, relatively better than the others. And if we put the smart EV startups in a bucket, I doubt any of them will top 10,000 units in April, psychologically, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any of them passing that threshold. And then the legacies, right? The mass brands, they're probably, especially the VWs and Toyotas that are over proportionally affected, they're down big.
Let me ask you, put a scenario in front of you. If you're a NIO or an XPeng, and let's say April numbers come in less than 5 figures, like you and I think. Okay, so less than 10,000 units. And then May comes in, less than 10,000 units because of the struggle. And you're supposed to launch the G9, or you're supposed to launch the ET5 and the ES7 later this year. Now, would you push that out? Would you prioritize current production first? Because let's assume that their order log is still increasing, right? And with an order log that's still increasing, but production is either at a crawl or non-existent. That means that lead times for a car that I order, an ES6 that's currently in production, might go from 4 weeks to 6 weeks to 8 weeks. Okay? And so would you push out launching these other two vehicles, or would you keep the launch cycle the same?
That's a tough one. I mean, in the case of NIO, right, you have the ET7, which is right now the
ramp,
the model that they have to take care of, because these people that have ordered the car have been waiting for a year and a half,
right?
Basically, and right, so I think that NIO would veer toward the ET7 a bit, whereas the other ones, right, the G9 and the L9, I mean, they've had the cadence of delivering starting the more toward the second half of the year.
Sure.
So it's a bit more pressing for NIO. And it looks like, for everyone, has the worst gone past us? Maybe. Right? The newest numbers out of Shanghai today, looks like the numbers have gotten a lot less, but that's numbers. We don't know the...
Hey, let me interject there, because as Shanghai goes down, we are looking at districts being restricted and locked down here in Beijing.
Have you done your testing today?
I have not.
Is this show interrupting your testing?
Yeah, so...
And school got out one day earlier, right?
Yeah, so the education minister... So we have May holiday. So it's a holiday weekend, and the kids would normally have Monday and Tuesday off, I think.
You're off until the 4th.
Yes. And so the education minister yesterday, so 2 things. This week, Monday, the kids were in class. some kids in Beijing that were in certain districts or certain areas of Beijing went online. But my kids being in CBD, we were fine until Wednesday. And then, surprise, surprise, we wake up and the kids are online. So my youngest, his teacher actually wasn't prepared. And so he didn't have school for the part of the morning. And then on the afternoon, he logged in. My oldest was ready. So
some of the, I've seen some of the notifications were sent out at 2 a.m. in the morning.
That's right. So
in the chat groups.
which tells me that these people are wavering a little bit. The powers that be are wavering a little bit, right? And it's amazing to be able to test this many people, because it went from 3.5 million people in Chaoyang district, where I live, to citywide, which is 21 million people, or 21-ish million people. But it's not mandatory, and there's no way to penalize you if you don't get a test. So there are people that I know that are not getting tested. And so if that happens, that filter, that net, has holes in it. And so, it's very challenging. So, I know you're a bit optimistic about Shanghai, Lei, but I'm not. I'm hopeful that Beijing learned its lesson. First of all, Beijing, it doesn't have the politics involved that Shanghai does. So they seem to be more decisive, and they seem to be more prepared. So on Sunday, they released 100 tons of eggs because there's a run on the grocery stores.
Yeah.
So and this is part of what we talked about just now, NIO, XPeng, these decision-making things, right? Because as planners, as supply chain guys, as sourcing guys, what we want is someone to tell us this will end on June 30th so that we can plan, right? And so the unpredictability of everything really creates, not only in the manufacturing team's mind, but in the consumer's mind, right? Okay, I want to buy a car. So although BYD is kind of able to be shielded, if this lasts into 2, 3, 4 months, there's no way that they're not going to be affected on the sales side, if not the production side. So again, we're lucky in Beijing that it's a holiday weekend, because I think there'd be a lot more anxiousness if not.
Well, I mean, this is almost like a whack-a-mole, right?
It's exactly what it is.
Starting with Jilin, moving toward Shanghai, and now Beijing is so far so good.
And remember, this, so let's go over. We know that Volkswagen, GM is in Shanghai. We know Volkswagen is in Jilin. We know that Baidu is in Shenzhen. Beijing has Mercedes. Beijing has, or Hyundai. Tianjin has Hyundai. Yeah, so everyone is going to be touched eventually if this whack-a-mole goes to all these different cities, right? And we've talked about this as well. We're only talking about the tier 1 suppliers, the seating suppliers, the door handle suppliers, the IP suppliers, the overhead suppliers. They buy things too, and their sources are likely in these smaller little cities. When I say small, when Lei and I say small, we say 2-3 million people small, right? That we don't even know about, that are probably locked down, right? Especially the southern border near Shenzhen in Yunnan province. There are cities and towns there that have been locked down for 60 days that you'll never even hear about.
Yeah. So basically the general outlook for April is it'll be down. But like last episode, I said it's better than I expected. But you're looking at the different buckets, you're going to see different performances. So BYD is pretty good. Some of the other ones in the southern parts of China are doing relatively better. Shanghai, Tesla, right? Volkswagen, Toyota, there will be more affected. So you're going to see slightly different variations of, decreases for April. But hopefully they can make it up, in the later months. But we'll see. Yeah.
I think it's important to note, Lei, that there are still those handful, 5, 6, 7, 8 EV companies in in China that have open order books for Europe too. So expect delays on shipments for exports, right? Because there's an article this week from, I want to say, Auto News or Nikkei, that said that route, the train route from Germany to China, and that one lane has closed because they're afraid Russians might steal those cars, or they might not make it to the final destination for whatever reason. And so they have to ship them on boats now. So two issues. You don't have production, you don't have supply. So there's going to be delays in deliveries for European customers too, for those handful BYD, NIO, Xpeng that are ordering in Europe. So
Yep.
But
Everybody's hoping it doesn't get worse.
I think what Lei and I have decided is that we'll spend a few minutes to update everyone on the production and manufacturing, the latest news. So I think that's important. And that's something that we are pretty good between Lei and I think, of getting the latest news, not just what you see in the media outlets. So how about we move on to what was mostly going to be our AV update episode?
Yeah. Well, I mean, what'd you think? It seems all of a sudden that these.
So let's look at this sequentially. So Pony came out with an announcement about a taxi license. So, if we look at it at a 50,000 foot level, they all seem kind of similar, right? We're launching this. But Pony is actually a paid service in Nansha. That was the original announcement earlier this week. So milestone for them, milestone for China. Okay. Nansha is a relatively small city in China. Okay. But nonetheless, quite an accomplishment. Yes. A district in Nansha.
Yeah.
But we have to remember, for the folks that have never been to China or only hear about China, a district in most Chinese cities is probably as big as the entire city in a lot of Europe or a lot of the United States. The next biggest announcement, I believe, was the Baidu announcement. And they have announced, and two things here that are significant. The city of Beijing, they're launching their non-safety driver pilot program in Beijing. Okay, so the significance of Beijing shouldn't be lost on people. Beijing is the capital city. It is much busier and much more hectic than a Nansha, any part of Nansha. And you had made a good point on Twitter. The safety driver is gone, but there does need to be someone in the car, a badged Baidu employee in the vehicle. So huge deal, something they should pat themselves on the back on. For sure. And what were the next announcements, Lei?
Oh, just the other one relating to Pony was the OnTime mobility ride-hailing platform from GAC Group, getting the $1 billion round of financing. And actually, Pony and WeRide are two of the investors in that round. And so that's the three pieces of news related to Pony.
So for those, Pony is Shanghai-based and Guangzhou-based?
Guangzhou-based. They're everywhere. Beijing.
Yeah. And then WeRide is Guangzhou headquartered. So they're actually chopping up China from a pilot standpoint.
Yeah.
But they're competing on the AV side, but they're cooperating on this ride-hailing platform.
Yeah. If you look at the competitive landscape, and we look at it from two different perspectives. One is the location. So Nansha, Guangzhou, and Yizhuang, Beijing are shaping up to be the AV capital of the world, at least in China, from these news, right? I mean, Nansha is where WeRide is going to put 50 of those robo-sweepers into testing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So if you are in Nansha right now, you're on cloud nine, right? If you're a AV enthusiast or fanatic, And the other side of the competitive landscape, I think, looking at it currently, is Baidu and Pony are definitely in a leadership position as far as advancing or progressing into that next stage of, let's say, what Cruise is doing in San Francisco or what Waymo is doing in Arizona. They're not there yet quite because of the, I was laughing yesterday because I've learned a new word in the Chinese presser. It says 方向盘后无人, which means
方向, okay.
no one behind the steering wheel, driverless, which means obviously there's somebody's
sitting shotgun. Somebody's sitting shotgun.
Yeah. So I mean, all these terminology and coming, I thought was interesting. But nevertheless, right? It's a progress. The next stage is obviously removing that passenger safety driver, right?
Or employee. He's not a driver. He's a safety employee.
In the middle of the armrest, there's this yellow button, right? that he can, press anytime there's a situation that comes up. But yeah, that's the competitive landscape, and it seems Pony and Baidu are kind of they're moving ahead together. They're shoulder to shoulder, but there's also that competition of right. Pony is now in 2 cities. I think Baidu, they're already in all 4
tier 1
cities. And then you look at the mileage, Baidu obviously has a little bit more mileage tested. But Pony says, I'm the first one to actually get that taxi license, which has a set of stringent requirements that you need to meet in order to get it, right? And the other part of it about OnTime is this mobility platform is less than 3 years old. It was established in June 2019, so almost 3 years. Invested by GAC Group, and I think being in Guangzhou served it well because of the Nansha, because of the local AV ecosystem that Pony and WeRide would invest into the ride-hailing platform. The CEO of OnTime, he said something which was interesting, is that there's a point in time when the competition in AVs moves from technologies, sensors into the operational management side of it. So any of these AV companies, they would need a operational partner to put the AVs onto the streets. And right, so that's why I think OnTime is I think they're pretty lucky. And in sharp contrast, we haven't heard much about Didi, right?
So let me add some color here. So Nansha, Guangzhou versus Beijing. Guangzhou is almost tropical, hot.
Yeah.
No snow. So it bodes well for AV companies to be able to test 365 days a year. Beijing doesn't snow that much, but it does snow. But Baidu, for them, it's really a feather in their cap to be able to say we're making stuff happen, or GSD, getting stuff done. The S actually stands for something else, but we'll say we're getting stuff done in the capital city. And if we're keeping score, Deep Route Maxwell Joe said, and he alluded to the same thing, we need operational partners. And so the idea that AV companies are software plays, that's going away, okay? In China, we need an operational partner, full stop. And Baidu, by way of being the biggest monster, are able to put the most kilometers in their algo. So, and WeRide has also partnered with a few operational OEMs as well. And so to summarize, NIO has, and these guys are going international. So I'm jumping ahead of myself. So NIO has a pilot program in Munich that's going to be launching with Sixt. WeRide has a pilot program that's going to be launching in UAE, I believe, Lei. And correct me if I'm wrong. And then they all have operations and pilots and testing in Silicon Valley. So there's no lack of ambition for any of these folks. And we can't forget Momenta, who GM has sent or committed to writing a $300 million check for. Okay. And that's just the robotaxi guys. There's commercial trucking guys like Too Simple, like Plus. And so we're seeing a bit of maturity here. And the OnTime is happening while Didi is still in the box. They can't catch a break. The Hong Kong Stock Exchange rejected them. The Chinese government said, you're still in the box. We're keeping you there for a little bit longer. So they're still in limbo. Okay. They upset somebody pretty badly, it seems.
And speaking of competition, right, you mentioned GM and Momenta. It's as much a competition among the AV startups as it is among the OEMs behind them. So Pony is invested by Toyota. So they're running these Lexus vehicles. WeRide is invested by the Alliance. So they're running the Nissan Leafs and the Sylphies, or the EVs, some of the EVs produced by Nissan, right? Whereas Baidu, they are working with several OEM partners, right? Hongqi and ArcFox, right? On a robotaxi, yeah. So, right, so this is a competition on so many different fronts, right? The regional governments, the policymakers, the AV companies, the hardware suppliers, the software, and OEMs.
And we're only talking about the first gen AV companies. We haven't even spoken about QCraft, Deep Route. So there are newbies, relatively newbie, right? Like OnTime, it's a 3-year-old company, but they saw an opportunity, and these SOEs want in on that, right? Because it sells their car, it sells their capacity to the AV companies, so they can get more of them on the road and keep their factories open. Because if they're not partnering with these AV companies, then whenever robotaxis in 10 years becomes a real thing, they're going to have to deal with that. They're going to become collateral damage unless they're partnering with these guys. And we should mention, Lei, that Huawei has also mentioned that they're going to be a bit slower on launching their vehicles with their partner Series and a couple of other Chinese companies. I forget now. I have them in my notes, but so effectively, and you please correct me if you're hearing different things. Huawei has contract manufacturers now because they're running the show. The brands, the EV brands that they're partnering with, they don't really have a say, I don't think.
Yeah. And Huawei has, in itself, it has 3 different types of approaches. So Huawei is a supplier, is a tier 1 supplier. That's one level. Huawei is a Huawei Inside partner. That's another level up. So let's say ArcFox and Series. And Huawei is on the 3rd level, in the case of Ito, is more of a participant on even, designs, right? The car designs that they're involved in. And they're investors into some of these new brands, right? Avatar, companies like those.
So let's move on to Cariad and that announcement that they now have a Chinese division that they're going to really lean on.
Yeah. So for those of you that may not know, that Cariad is essentially Mobility Asia rebranded. And if you knew, Mobility Asia was headed by Wei Ming So, who is off to doing something new, and we've mentioned this many times.
Well, he's technically just the CEO of Renault China.
Yeah, and I think we tweeted back and forth on Twitter that the Cariad China interesting as much as what they're doing as who's running the show. So the CEO is a guy who's a lifer at Volkswagen. He is a German, but he was born and raised in Harbin. And he's one of the guys who actually started very early days of the Cariad. and I guess he's called back to run the show in China. Okay, so this is a guy that's kind of have had the, at least cultural wise, a diverse background, and the CTO is
Cultural wise within Volkswagen.
Yeah. And the CTO, who used to be at IBM for almost 2 decades before, arriving in Volkswagen, I think in 2017. So technically, these are both VW guys, with the CTO having had the kind of the IBM experience. But I think you had some issues with that. I think that right. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Do you want somebody from the internal elevated to these type of positions, or do you want someone else from the outside to run it?
I know externally I might seem a bit hard on Volkswagen Group, but that's because I'm here in Beijing. I hear from their employees and I see the frustrations on the ground because they want to do the right thing. And they're just not capable because decision making is still very centralized. And Lei, are you getting the same impression from when you talk to people? You know, Wallenstein, he did the best that he could. I think you and I agree with that. But again, his replacement is somebody from Germany. It's not, why would they allow, or why would they hire? Well, and and this is the thing, right? He's German. He's 20 years in Volkswagen, most of that time in Germany. So they're saying the right things. I read the media release on the Cariad website. So Dirk Hilgenberg is the global CEO of Cariad. First of all, why do you separate the software development team into an entire company? I don't get that. Okay. They need to be embedded in part of the company, and they need to drive the change, right? Not as some separate company. And it says, together with our China team, we are working towards one goal: to code the future of mobility. What does that mean? No, you're there to enable the best user experience and customer engagement through your brands as you can. Coding the future of mobility. What? That tells me right then and there that they're not thinking the bogey is completely different than what it needs to be, right? They said this in a media release.
Yeah, I think what you mean is this use of mobility is becoming too much of a catchphrase or cheesy, a term. Whereas, I look at this, first of all, I think at least they have, right? Obviously, even though he's a German national, but he is Chinese in some ways, right? So
yep.
to the CEO and the CTO are Chinese. So I guess, that's good. But what?
And I don't know them, so I'm not trying to be personal.
By the way, when I talked to Wallenstein in the Max episode, he kind of mentioned this guy, but it wasn't included in our final recording. So now I kind of understand. And going back actually to what Wallenstein said, his quote, that China has made it, and translating that into Cariad China. And one of the very important phrases that they use in the press release was, in China, for China, and in China for the world, with China's speed. So this Cariad China entity is actually very important to the Cariad Global, right? They're developing, I think somewhere it said 70% of development was led by the China entity on some of the global programs. But here's Changqing, when he spoke, basically there's a 3-step process. Their end goal is to launch this, all new uniform stack, right? That's their end goal. And then
by mid-decade.
Yeah. And then kind of the second, so I'm going backwards, right? So the second was to have this high-end software platform suitable for the PPE, which is also coming on a couple of years later. with the Audi and the Porsche. And this is all I'm talking about China. And the first priority is
So let me interrupt you there.
Yeah.
Because Audi had Artemis. Artemis got rolled into Cariad. And I think that's what they're talking about.
Yeah. And then going back further to the present, their first priority of this Cariad China is to actually have this so-called production software platform that will be able to OTA for the ID family. So this will happen in the second half of 2022, all for China. So this is their 3-step process. And when the CTO came on to talk, he gave a few examples. So one of the examples he gave was this there's this forward innovative action that they're taking. There's this rainbow project.
I didn't understand that at all.
Yeah, they showed this lady sitting in the car. So what they're trying to do is offer this, what you're wearing that day, you know, the type of clothing, the color, based on that, they will have a way to create a smart cockpit that kind of meshes with your mood or your style that day. So that's something interesting that they're doing. I don't know how, it's almost like what's the word? The feel inside a cabin, right?
Yeah.
They're trying to create that. It's just one of the examples that he gave. And there was tons of others that were quite technical. But he also talked about this management toolkit, right, for developers, this process method toolkit, so-called PMT. But at the end of the day, this is reflecting China has made it common where the times or the days, it's the other way around. I think Volkswagen, he kind of alluded to that in the conversation. And this is reflected now by Cariad. And I think Cariad look forward to post-2025 on what they have. But in the immediate concern is ID.
If it takes them until 2025 to develop this hardware software stack, they should just go buy Deep Route. They should just go buy. Honestly, right? Like they're getting it done every 6 months. There's announcement, right? Like it's tiring just hearing you saying this is a 3-step process, dude. It's software development. It should be freaking agile.
Yeah.
I mean, you should be coming out with something all the time. I don't care how big your team is. They did say that they're going to go from 1,200.
From, I think, 600
to 1,200 by 2023.
Yeah.
Right? So remember this. They have to compete against Jidu, Baidu, Neo, Li Auto, Xpeng for talent, right?
Yeah.
That's the key, for talent. If I am a Chinese developer that's worth my weight in gold, then I would want options. Volkswagen's options aren't going to be worth a damn. Incrementally, I might make 10, 20% more over a period of 4 years, but if I'm at a startup, man, so.
Yeah, I'm not as pessimistic as you are. This entity is sort of Volkswagen's vengeance play. I think.
Yeah.
I feel a bit that way, and this is not something that I have immediate fruit in the next few months, right?
Sure. So the reason I'm imploring them, it hurts my feelings that they're not thinking about this differently, because they've lost 14%, 7% in the last 2 years of production volume, right? And the ID series is not doing well. So they can't wait 3 years is my point. And they aren't emphasizing speed. They've said it in the media, but 3 years is not fast. And so and that's why the whole point of me saying somebody from outside needs to go in there and kick some ass, like a Doug Field from Ford. Okay. He's probably given 3 years. Farley's probably given them 3 years to turn that stuff around. Right. He's not, and we're talking about the entire company being turned around, not a hardware software stack being developed for your 9 brands. Right. So again, I'm
yeah, it's just I think for Volkswagen, a lot on their plate right now, and they have their work cut out for them, right? On the one hand, the production issues, production loss, ID sales, right? All of these issues that they're all, not Volkswagen, many of the foreign legacy brands are confronting this funk in China. And I mean, Volkswagen had to start somewhere. So Cariad, China is a starting place, at least on the kind of the in-house vertical integration. And then I was gonna say the other thing that they announced a couple of weeks ago is the selection of 20 Chinese tech companies for their SSP future models, not in China, but for the other Western markets. So I guess they're going parallel, right? So in-house plus these partners. So how that plays out? How do they balance going forward?
And I tweeted, this is the challenge with using significant partners, at least on the software side. For hardware, it's fine, right? To have a Lear build your seats for your Audi R5 or your A6. That's fine. But when it comes to software and hardware on the tech side, a lot of that, if you Frankenstein a system together, there's the potential for just a ton of bugs. And you lose control of the complete design process. And so I don't know what the balance is for Volkswagen, for GM, or for Ford when it comes to when do we outsource, when do we insource and keep things in-house. But think of it, the more in-house, the more control. But the more outsourced, the faster you can probably get it done, right? Generally speaking. So if they want a compelling user experience, they need to bring a lot of that in-house, right?
For us, the industry observers, this is great to see because you have the seesaw battle, right? The foreigners led, now the Chinese out in the front, the foreigners trying to catch up, right? It's not to the point where we can't say that, right? We always say many times that the startups are not out of the woods and the legacies are not dead. So let's give it a couple of years. But if they can get this right, if Volkswagen can get the Carrier China right, they'll have a chance. But if they don't, then I don't know, right? Let's be patient a little bit. Let's not call the fat ladies that hasn't right. So it's not to that point yet. So I tend to I tend to root for Volkswagen a bit. Not that I'm biased, but just this, to see whether they can come back or they can do this.
When I was in my 20s and still super, 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 super car guy, like I still love Porsches. I still love Audis. Audis were never that big in the United States, but I always thought they're beautiful cars.
So the Porsche Taycan Gran Turismo that was launched in China a couple of days ago, I said that was my favorite car because it met 3 criteria. First, it was a Porsche. Second, it was an electric car. And 3, it was a shooting brake. So that one car satisfied all my 3 desires.
Sure. And let me be clear, Lei, because I have been dumping on Volkswagen, but it's almost like I want them to succeed. I want them to succeed so bad, right?
See, that's exactly I think what I was trying to say.
I want them to win, and I'm biased. I want everybody to win. Unfortunately, that's not going to happen, and that's why we make these comments, right? That's the reality of it. And so, but to see such a huge company over the last several years, and yeah, I'm still a little bit jaded with the Dieselgate thing. That still bugs me a little bit. Yeah. I just think that there should have been more severe penalties for that. But anyways, I'm pretty tough when we talk about GM, when we talk about Ford. I like to think I'm pretty tough when it comes to those companies as well. So I just need to have a better outlook, I think.
Yeah. And the only other thing was going back to the sales was the state council released a circular a few days ago. Basically, it's just said, to support sales of NEVs and vehicle sales in general and no longer put any more restrictions into place in limiting sales. So that there's one sign, and if you look at the production reboot, right, I think we're seeing this coordination going on through various levels of the government. So that's why earlier I said, it feels like it's getting better. The worst may be behind us. So you see these signs, you see these announcements, pointing to some kind of stability.
If they can wall off and really create closed loops, let's say, for instance, blocking off Beijing, if I hope it doesn't, but if it gets more serious here, being able to block that off, and as Shanghai goes down in infections, kind of restarting that, I just feel that it's just really difficult, especially with this variant, to be COVID zero. And there's always going to be that risk. So, for the summer anyways, this risk is going to be here for sure. And April's going to be a mess. Do you think that the ICE sales is an overall indication? Do you think the EVs will be a little bit better, at least?
Well, the EVs are, because, right, we're still talking about a relatively low base, and ICE market share we're going down anyways.
Yeah.
So that's why I said, if both are going down, but EVs, especially BYD, right, the level that they've had, then I expect to see similar penetration rates on NEVs from months past, right? Though the volumes are down a bit, so that's my expectation.
Oh, so a couple things that I made notes of that I failed to talk about really quickly. CATL's Evogo has their first partner.
Oh, the iWays second partner. iWays
second partner. Sorry,
yeah.
For battery swapping.
I heard, so by the way, I've also heard some of the second, third tier EV startups are coming on board and announcements are imminent.
Yes, for sure. I would think that CATL probably bullied them a little bit to come on board. A few of them anyways.
Yeah, and if you look at the FAW Bestune iWays, these are two brands that are not...
They need this push.
Right, they haven't resonated with the Chinese domestic market, right? So you tend to think that these type of the companies are the early ones that will work with CATL's battery swap, and not the prominent ones, at least not yet.
And you have to point back to iWays being in 12 markets outside of, or 14 markets outside of China. Maybe that is CATL's way of moving their Evogo swapping abroad. So,
well, iWays did say in the presser that they were looking at this battery swap abroad as well. So,
yes, and you and I had the pleasure of speaking with someone this week for our Max episode that didn't seem to think that battery swapping was going to be very successful outside of China. So
in particular, the US, I think that was yeah.
And we should give BYD kudos. Their cash flow increased significantly from Q1 sales.
That was a out of this world number, 8,000% increase, right? What?
So we have two of our Snowball Capital friends on. So they've been, besides us, obviously, they've been ringing that bell since we've known them, right?
Yeah. And also a little bit debate on who that LFP partner was for Ford, right?
I think it's Goshen. I think it is Goshen.
It could be Goshen or SK. I don't know. But I mean, obviously Goshen's announcement was with a big American public listed automaker, right? I mean, there's only 3 of them, GM, Tesla, and Ford. Who else?
So, well, yeah, because Dodge is actually part of a French company now, right?
So, yeah. So housekeeping. So basically, you'll be on a little mini vacation. I don't know. But obviously, next week we get to talk the April sales numbers because they'll be out on May 1st, which is Sunday? Yes, Sunday. So we'll be back on May 5th, right?
Yes.
Okay, so we'll have the same time next Thursday.
And I think if you're looking for up to the minute or up to the day updates, just follow me or Lei on Twitter about production and manufacturing life in China. Beijing is and now Guangzhou. You've heard about Guangzhou now, right? Right, Lei?
Yeah, speaking of, my friend got out of the quarantine. He boarded the bullet train this morning from Shenzhen back to Beijing. So I'm really happy for him.
Into another quarantine.
No. I don't know. I have to check with him. I think he said he doesn't have the quarantine for some reason.
Really?
Right. I don't know how it was, but I'll check with him. But at least, I mean, he's gone through that process of leaving the U.S. 7 days ahead of time. You have to do this and that, right? Board the plane, land, stay in the hotel for 21 days. Just a push notification right now. Elon Musk sold around $4 billion worth of Tesla shares. That must be for Twitter or no?
Yes, for sure. So I'm going to say this. We can end this on this note, unless you want to retort.
No, I think we're good.
Twitter being owned by Elon and the Chinese government, there is leverage there. There is leverage there. Full stop.
Yeah.
So to say that the Chinese government's not going to try to influence him, that's wrong. That's a wrong way to look at it. Will he be influenced? That's another question, right?
I agree.
That brings us to the end of this week's show. Lei and I thank you for tuning in. My name is Tu Lee, and you can find me on Twitter at Sino Auto Insight. That's SinoAutoInsight. You can find Lei on Twitter at Leixing77. That's LEIXING77. If you wouldn't mind rating and or reviewing us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you grab your podcast from, we'd appreciate that as well. Even better, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends about it. Please join us again next week as we track down all the latest news on China, EVs, and more.